let's go through the facts to see whether or not each of these boxes are going to be met in this particular case. Now, any reasonable inferences are going to be drawn for the plaintiff that is filing this lawsuit. And yeah, let's get into it. Okay. So, factual allegations. We are on page 9 of this complaint. A revolver is a deadly weapon. It is designed to inflict severe bodily harm or death. The defendants chose to use real firearms for the feature film production Rust, a gun-heavy Western film being shot at the Bonanza Creek Ranch near Santa Fe, New Mexico, despite the danger inherent in any use of real firearms. Because firearms are inherently dangerous, the movie industry has adopted clear and strict safety protocols for the use of firearms to ensure that no one ever be injured during the production of a movie. The Rust production was responsible for the safe use of firearms on set and the safety of its cast and crew. Every member of the production, cast and crew alike, was at all times required to follow industry protocols and adhere to basic gun safety rules. Defendants Baldwin, the producers, and the Rust production companies breached the most basic rules of firearm use on a film production. These basic rules for safe gun handling include: always treat the gun as if it were loaded. Now, right here, this so we're at paragraph 44, and there are sub points here. So A through I. These are each going to be basically duties of reasonable care that were present on set. So when we were talking about those 4 elements of negligence, that first element, was there a duty? These are each different duties that have that were present on set that they are alleging were breached. So we're talking about elements 1 and 2 because they're not only identifying them, they are saying that they were actually breached by the defendants. So, okay. So A, always treat the gun as if it were loaded. B, never point the gun at anything the operator of the gun, in this case, defendant Baldwin, doesn't intend to destroy. C, always keep the gun pointed in a safe direction and never at yourself or anyone else. D, always keep the gun unloaded unless it is absolutely necessary to load the gun for use on a scene. Then and only then, a qualified person acting as the weapons master or armorer should load the gun. Never place a finger on the trigger unless the operator is ready to shoot. F, be sure of the person's target and what is behind it. G, learn the mechanical and handling characteristics of the particular gun being used. H, load the gun in front of the actors or crew who may be in the line of fire. I, personally perform or observe a visual inspection of the gun to ensure no ammunition is contained in the cartridge. So this sounds a lot like general gun safety measures, right? So a lot of people have been talking about how Hollywood seems to have different standards than other normal people, right? And when we were talking about this particular case, there is a possibility that there could be slightly different standards because we are talking about a movie set and we are talking about certain people taking certain responsibilities for these different items, right? So, people know that the armorer is, generally speaking, supposed to be in charge of the in charge of all of the weapons on set. We know that the prop people, generally speaking, are in charge of all of the props. You have this division of roles just so that certain people can be on top of certain responsibilities. Now, when it comes to something like a firearm, the case can definitely be made that every single individual on set that handles that firearm also shares a certain amount of responsibility. And I think that is probably going to be the standard in this particular case. So all of these things are things that anyone is going to hear on pretty much any gun range anywhere, right? Like things like you only point down range. You only, if you point anywhere, you have to know exactly where you're pointing and what is behind anything that you're pointing at. Don't point it at anything you don't intend to destroy. These are very, very common rules that that a lot of people will abide by when they are handling a firearm. So, paragraph 45, the rules for Rust Productions' use of the revolver by Defendant Baldwin required training for Defendant Baldwin and the presence on site of an expert in the safe handling of firearms to enforce proper safety protocols and train others in such safety protocols and the safe handling of firearms. The property master or the armorer must instruct the actors on the proper and safe use of the weapons, including the basic safety rules described above, and ensure no dangerous conditions are ever created by firearms. The armorer must be responsible for loading and unloading the firearms and must check the firearms before and after each instance in which they are handled. So this paragraph right here is pointing obviously right at Hannah Gutierrez Reed and at the assistant director, David Hall, as well as Alec Baldwin as well. So we've got, and the thing is that, you know, even if, let's say, Hannah Gutierrez says, well, you know, I wasn't allowed to be there. It wasn't my fault. It was somebody else's fault because of XYZ. Then whoever she's pointing at, you know, could potentially share some liability with her, but she still probably has, at the end of the day, a measure of liability in this particular case because she did have all of those responsibilities. She was the person that was supposed to be loading and unloading the firearms. She was supposed to be the one that was checking everything, making sure everything was safe. That literally is her job on set, right? And the same thing with David Hall. If he's the one that's stepping on her toes so that she can't perform her job, he shares some liability because he stepped into her role for that. So there's, you know, allegedly, you know, assuming that is what comes out in this case, but that's what we understand happened based on the reporting, right? So anyone that has been either stepping into that role that she is responsible for, or that has been preventing her from doing the job that she was supposed to do, that she was tasked to do, that she would have done if the conditions had been safe. Anyone that's responsible for kind of impeding that is also going to share some liability. But none of those things would take away from her responsibility in maintaining the safety of that firearm. And at the same time, I don't see any way that Alec Baldwin gets out of sharing liability here as well, because at the end of the day, he's the one that had the gun in his hand, right? So, all right. The Rust production involved extensive use of firearms and required an experienced firearms expert with the skill and qualifications to maintain constant vigilance for safety matters, notwithstanding the numerous firearms present on the set of Rust and the frequency of their use to fire cartridges in simulated gunfights. Defendant Gutierrez Reed was an inexperienced weapons master with only one movie production under her belt, unqualified for the degree of skill required on the Rust set. So that points to not just her, but whoever hired her. So who's responsible for hiring her? Who's responsible for putting her in that position? That's somebody who is potentially sharing liability because of the fact that she allegedly did not have the requisite experience for this kind of a role. Defendant Baldwin and the others, and the other producers, were aware that Defendant Gutierrez Reed was unqualified, and they ignored Defendant Gutierrez Reed's concerns that performing the dual roles of armorer and assistant prop master would result in lapses in basic firearm safety. So right there, we are talking about not just negligence, but recklessness. If you know that something exists and then you decide to move forward anyway, you know that some kind of a condition exists and you move forward anyway and you ignore it. We are pointing at recklessness, not even basic negligence. Defendant Baldwin and the other defendants ignored actual unintentional firearm discharges that had occurred on the set of Rust as a direct consequence of failures of Defendant Gutierrez Reed to adequately perform her duties as armorer, and did not replace Defendant Gutierrez Reed with a qualified armorer or require additional safety procedures to correct the dangerous conditions on the set of Rust, despite multiple written complaints about the danger. So this is another situation. So not only did they know that she was not particularly qualified for this kind of a role, but they also knew that there were other situations where a firearm went off when it was not supposed to have gone off, and that they knew that and they ignored it. Anytime they know and they ignore, we're talking about recklessness. So, and this is like And you can also have, maybe some producers were not, maybe some of the producers were not there on set physically, but they still have responsibility because they have people that are on set that are reporting to them, or people that are on set that are reporting to someone else that's reporting to them. So there's still, because there's a chain of basically like corporate responsibility here, we still have people that are held responsible for these kinds of things, even if they're not physically there themselves. The most basic firearm safety rule in the movie industry is that there must never be live ammunition containing bullets, gunpowder, and a live primer on a movie set, as live ammunition could mistakenly be loaded into a gun. Industry standards in the Bonanza Creek locations rules specifically forbade the use of any live ammunition containing bullets on the set of Rust. Where bullets that appear to be real are required for cinematic purposes, dummy bullets that typically contain a BB, a small metal ball, are used, which are distinguishable from live ammunition upon visual inspection or by shaking to hear the BB inside. The live bullet that killed Halyna Hutchins was present on the set of Rust at the time of the shooting and was not detected prior to its discharge due to the failure of the defendants to follow industry standard safety protocols and perform basic firearm safety checks. So, if you guys are familiar with the Hannah Gutierrez Reed civil lawsuit, the one that she filed, there's also a part in there. I don't know if you remember, but there was a part in her allegations where she talks about how she picked up the box and she shook it because she was listening to hear if those were dummy rounds. The problem with that is she said she picked up the box of rounds as opposed to individual rounds. And so this makes it very clear, these allegations here saying that each round is supposed to kind of jingle because there's a BB in there as opposed to live ammunition. But if you pick up a box, each of these rounds are going to jingle next to each other. So that would seem like those factual allegations would seem to be consistent with, either her inexperience or her lack of attention, perhaps. And that's something that has been alleged by one of these defendants in another civil lawsuit. So, paragraph 48. Many of the movie industry firearm safety protocols are tailored to the purpose of protecting cast and crew from the risk of injury from the discharge of blank ammunition that does not contain bullets. But those same safety protocols and basic gun safety rules, when followed, have the effect of ensuring that no discharge of a firearm on the set ever presents a danger to human life, even if a bullet is present. Because defendant Baldwin and the others involved in the Rust production did not follow industry protocols and basic gun safety rules, a live round containing a .45 caliber bullet was in the revolver held by defendant Baldwin at the time of the shooting, ready to be fired, and defendant Baldwin caused that bullet to be discharged directly at Miss Hutchins. The events that resulted in the death of Halyna Hutchins occurred on and leading up to October 21st, 2021, when defendant Alec Baldwin and Halyna Hutchins were on the set of Rust. Defendant Baldwin was the film's executive producer, lead actor, and contributing writer. Miss Hutchins was the film's director of photography. At the time of the shooting, defendant Baldwin, Miss Hutchins, and other crew members were doing a lineup of a shootout scene in an old abandoned church. The sole purpose of a lineup for this scene was to confirm the positioning, frame, and focus of the camera for a close-up shot of defendant Baldwin's hand and the revolver he was holding. But defendant Baldwin's possession of a real revolver, let alone a revolver loaded with any ammunition at all, was unnecessary to achieve this purpose. The scene in question did not even call for the revolver held by defendant Baldwin to be fired. So they're saying there wasn't even supposed to be anything in this revolver. He didn't even need to have an actual revolver at that time when they were rehearsing that scene. Anyway, so this is danger that was introduced to the scene that didn't need to be introduced. And what they're saying is that if they had followed all of the industry standards and all of the protocols, then this wouldn't have happened, because they can they can do what they need to do without putting anyone else at risk here. Now, whether or not that's actually true is something that would be litigated in this case. I mean, assuming it doesn't settle like right away, that's a huge possibility here. But for the purposes of a motion to dismiss, we're assuming that this is true. We're assuming that this is correct, the way that they are alleging this. Defendant Baldwin was sitting on a church pew at the Bonanza Creek location, approximately 4 feet away from multiple members of the crew of Rust, when he reached across his body and used his right hand to grab the revolver holstered on his left side, drew the revolver with a cross-draw movement across his body, and aimed it directly at Miss Hutchins while drawing back the hammer on the revolver. He released the revolver's hammer and bam. I'm reading this directly for anybody that is listening on the podcast version. I'm reading this verbatim. He released the revolver's hammer and bam, Defendant Baldwin fired the revolver. The live bullet discharged from Defendant Baldwin's revolver struck Miss Hutchins in the side of her chest, ricocheted through her body, causing grievous injury, and exited Miss Hutchins' body with sufficient force to strike Director Joel Souza in the shoulder and pass almost entirely through his body. Miss Hutchins endured enormous pain and suffering and died from her wounds. So here we have element number 3, which it seems silly that that we need to check that box because we all know what happened, right? But the judge that is going to be reading this has to know that this element is met, right? That we can check that box. So we can check the box for harm, for negligence. Paragraph 54. Defendant Baldwin, the producers, and the Rust production companies were aware of firearms safety issues that had occurred on the set of Rust and did not take action to correct the situation and ensure that basic gun safety rules were followed on October 21st, 2021. Had Defendant Baldwin, the producers, and the Rust production companies taken adequate precautions to ensure firearm safety on the set of Rust, or if basic firearm safety rules had been followed on the set of Rust on October 21st, 2021, Halyna Hutchins would be alive and well, hugging her husband and 9-year-old son. So this is getting to causation. They are alleging that, had they done everything the way that they were supposed to, no bullet, the revolver wouldn't have gone off the way that it did. There wouldn't have been live ammunition in there. She wouldn't have been hit with a bullet. She wouldn't have passed through her body. She wouldn't have had, grievous bodily harm. She wouldn't have died. So this is getting to causation here. And basically what they're saying is, on the one hand, they're saying that there were people that did not take action to correct the situation and ensure that basic gun safety rules were followed. And at the same time, there were people that what to do, sorry. So on the one hand, there were not rules that were enforced, and then there were not rules that were followed. So we have people, regardless of whether this is somebody who is supposed to be enforcing the rules or following the rules, everyone from top to bottom is responsible.